Good evening. Welcome aboard all. It's 7:55 p.m. in the central time zone of the United States of America on this Thursday, December 30th. If you're a regular listener to this podcast or this stream and you're saying to yourself, these sound like the nightly tones. What's going on? It's evening time. Why is the Common Good podcast coming to us right now? I got so wound up over something this last week that we really want to get it in this week. And today is the 1 week out anniversary of the insurrection at the United States Capitol. And what a lot of us had thought was that there was an insurrection happening outside the Capitol. We saw the pictures. It was fueled by a lot of Christian nationalism. It was fueled by a lot of conspiracy theories. It was fueled and funded in its imagination and its call by the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. And we thought it was coming from there. As it turns out, we've learned a lot in the last 51 weeks that this insurrection was also happening inside the Capitol. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because Peter Navarro, who was the trade advisor to the Trump administration, has a new book out and is telling everyone about the plan that they had in place with more than 100 congresspeople and Steve Bannon to run a coup inside the United States Capitol while the certification was supposed to be happening on January 6th. So we're going to talk about it today, launch us into a whole week of reminding ourselves that this attack on our democracy is not just something that was happening on one day outside the Capitol. It's something we have to prepare for ongoing. So we're going to do that tonight. And so I don't know, maybe this whole thing, Rob, is going to have a little evening tone to it. You know, it's late. It's been a full day. We're between Christmas and New Year. There's parties behind us, parties in front of us, but today it's serious business.
That's right. Very.
And Dan, exciting. The music is still playing. Yeah, Dan, the theme music is still running,
as it should be.
As I texted Dan about that a second ago while you were talking, Doug, and he said, "Can you hear it?"
Like, oh yeah, I can still hear it.
Yeah, that's how I knew it was still playing.
Do you want it to not play? I could turn it off abruptly.
Let's stop it. Yeah. Were you waiting for the whole song to finish out?
I was giving us a nice intro, you know.
It was.
You guys had to.
This is, normally we do this in the morning, occasionally in the afternoon. We do it on Tuesdays, but listen, the insurrection. Both the insurrection inside the Capitol building and the insurrection inside the White House that we're going to talk about warrants breaking the rules, quite frankly, and breaking the mold and doing something different. And coming to talk about this on a Thursday evening. So yeah. It's
not a Tuesday morning, but a Thursday evening. This is just the upside down world we live in. All right, So here's the story. Maybe you've seen this already.
Yeah.
Or just saw some news headlines about this. But Peter Navarro was the trade advisor to the Trump administration. Then he became the Kona. Jeez, you wonder what's in my glass at this hour? The coronavirus kooky czar. So he's the guy pitching the
hydrochloroquine.
Yeah, chloroquine. And
aren't we glad we can't remember how to pronounce that now?
Yeah, he probably suggested that maybe he could put the light inside the bodies. Anyway, he's just been all about all the conspiracy theories top to bottom. Side note, in fact, his whole trade advisor approach toward China is built around a whole series of indefensible ideas. He's just one of these people who really had no business doing the business of the United States government. Now, look, as we say, every person should be able to vote. Every person should be able to ask someone to vote for them. No doubt about it. Every person is the beloved child of God, but not every child of God should be the trade advisor. And that's been certainly true of Peter Navarro. And he had no business running around the White House and having the power of an appointed position at all. But then this guy uses that appointed position between the election and the start of the insurrection and the start of the Trump of the Biden administration, the inauguration, between election and inauguration, he uses that period of time in there to put together a sophisticated scheme and has written a book about it and is going around doing media interviews about it. So Rolling Stone had an article about this, the Washington Post, the Daily Beast, and his own book, and Peter Navarro's own conversation with Steve Bannon, who's his buddy in crime in this, describing what they had put together. So, Rob, do you have anything else you want to say about the intro before we sort of describe what the plan was that they were operating and how it involved Ted Cruz and Congressman Gosart and apparently up to 98 or more other Congress people that were in on this thing?
Yeah, I think maybe we ought to start with what they called it, because you name something, in the Christian tradition, other religious traditions, naming something is pretty significant. Giving something a name, has, there's great weight to that. And so this is, you think about operations, in the military world where, Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm and all those things, they get named these, these inspiring, wonderful names. And so they came up with a name, a code name, probably something that they could text about or talk about without everybody knowing exactly what they were talking about. And their name for this operation that they devised was Green Bay Sweep,
which was a reference to 1960s Green Bay football, when apparently the football coach, Green Bay Packers, Vince Lombardi, had a
legendary
play
coach
that put a whole bunch of linemen lined up, and then they would run, in a sweeping fashion, and the running back would be behind him, and they would roll over the defenders and get into the goal line. So this was the idea. How do they get this thing across the goal? And what they wanted to get across the goal was to stop the certification of the electoral college votes. So the process, if we all remember, was that people voted on November 3rd or before, and not after, but they voted on election day or before if they did their mail-in ballots or went in person and voted early. And all those are tallied up. And then each state certified those votes and which candidate for president received the most votes in that state. And then those electoral votes went to that candidate and were then brought to Congress and then were presented before Congress. And in a ceremonial act, Congress certifies the receiving of those votes, and they become the legal justification for the presidency to be in the hands of the elected president. So that's all supposed to happen, does happen. Turns out this actually didn't happen on January 6th when it was scheduled to, because it had to be postponed because of the insurrection on January and early hours of the morning on January 7th. Well, what Bannon and Navarro put together, and what Navarro writes in his book called Trump Time, what he's telling reporters and talked to Steve Bannon about on his own podcast, we'll show you a little clip of that in a minute, was that their plan was this: to stall out that certification process, to put it under enough media scrutiny and pressure so that the United States of America could pay attention to all of their Kookyville theories about why 6 states should not have their electoral college votes recognized by Congress after having been certified by the states, and to send them back to the states, and then to ask the state legislatures in those states to cast their vote for who the electoral college representatives should be from their state. So what they wanted to do was to take it away from the people who voted in those 6 states and to have the state legislature vote on it. But what they needed to do was to get Mike Pence. This is where the idea of Green Bay Sweep comes from, that he's the quarterback who is supposed to then run this play that allows them to stall out the certification, send it back to the states, and then we end up in a limbo. Trump stays president past Inauguration Day, and then the states are going to then make a decision at the legislative level at the states. This was their plan.
Yes, because they believed that the anti-Trump media, that was in their mind ubiquitous and everywhere, including places like Fox News, were not giving a fair hearing to all of the reasons why the votes in these states should not count, and all of their reasons why, corruption took place and vote stealing and everything else, all of these kooky ideas they had. So they believed that the media wasn't sufficiently covering this. So the way to get the media to cover it was to create this media spectacle via a stunt. And that would produce, in their estimation, if they challenged the votes, if they challenged the certification, were able to do this, that would lead to like a 2-hour per state hearing in both the Senate and the House. So it could lead to, so you got 6 states times 2 hours per state times 2 chambers of Congress. They would have up to 24 hours to broadcast on C-SPAN and CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and in Twitter clips and Facebook Live and all of it. It would give them basically an audience to rile up the American people about the idea that the election was stolen. So they really had no, there's no legal means to overturn the election. There's no legal mechanism to do this. What they were trying to do was to create a publicity stunt that would put pressure on Congress to vote in a certain way, because they could bring, the eyes of the American people to this issue that they believed was not sufficiently done. Now, there's so many flaws in this.
It was never going to work. It's just a silly nonsense idea.
A, it's never going to work. B, the idea that the media didn't cover the post-election possibility of fraud is ridiculous.
Right.
The idea that the majority of the American people were unaware of these claims or these allegations, and were, and if they were just made aware of them, that they would change their opinion, ridiculous, because the majority of the American people voted for Joe Biden to be president in record numbers. So
that's a good point.
The whole plan was fundamentally flawed from the very beginning. It was a complete misreading of the playing field. They misread what was happening in the media. They misread the mood of the American public, and frankly, they also misread, if Peter Navarro is to be believed, the mood of their own supporters.
Yeah, and they misread Mike Pence. The plan hinged that Mike Pence had to say, I'm not going to certify this because there's still questions about if the states should be trusted to certify their own election results.
Yeah.
This is where it really gets scary when you think about what they were proposing and they put in motion and they accomplished for a short number of hours, which was to delay the certification on the 6th of January. Now, perhaps that was because there was an violent insurrection where people beat police officers and trampled over other people and broke into the Capitol and defiled it. But it was also all part of their plan. The reason people were there calling Mike Pence a traitor is because Mike Pence was planning to certify those state counts. So what Navarro and Bannon were suggesting was that the federal government, think about this, that these are so-called Republicans, that federal government should tell states that their own certification of electoral votes should not count. That they should step in and decide that the states said these are our votes, but then the federal government, the federal Congress should say, no, we're not going to accept your votes. We're going to accept them from the other states, the other 46 states, but we're not going to accept them from these 6 states. We're going to ask your legislature, not your elections department, not the people who cast votes and counted votes. We're not going to ask them to determine who the electoral votes from your state come from. We're going to ask your state legislature to do it instead in 6 select states. That in and of itself is something that we just need to stop for a minute and recognize. These weren't just two goofballs running a podcast at, on a Thursday night instead of a Tuesday morning. These were former and current White House employees. These were federal employees working or having in the past worked for the Trump administration. That's what we're talking about. And they claim that they had more than 100 Congress people in on this plan, including Ted Cruz and Representative Gohart, who Gohart put up the objection. Ted Cruz matched it from the Senate, and that's what caused the initial delay. So they were running this plan.
Yeah.
That is just shocking to me.
Yeah.
Just utterly shocking.
One of the really interesting things to me, getting back to Mike Pence, in the articles about this, talking about Navarro's book, is the blame that they place on this not working, was ultimately on Mike Pence, because Mike Pence refused to go along with it. And one of the really interesting things is that Peter Navarro claims to have seems to have a lot of animosity towards Mark Short, who was Pence's chief of staff, who, of those of you that are careful listeners to the Common Good Politics podcast, would know that a couple of weeks ago we listened to a clip from Mark Short and exegeted it and had comments on it. So same guy. And so what Peter Navarro says is that when Mark Short became chief of staff for Mike Pence, they describe it as like Kremlin-like, that Mike Pence suddenly became unavailable to anybody else. And basically you kind of got the vision that before Mark Short started, that any nut job working in the White House could just walk into Mike Pence's office and have a conversation with him about their latest conspiracy theory. And Mark Short put some limits on that. It was like, nah, everything's got to come through me. I'm his chief of staff, and I'm going to, weed the crazy people out. And so Peter Navarro is, basically blaming Mark Short for not giving them the opportunity to get with Mike Pence and convince him that this is what he should do. And so that's why he, didn't go along with it.
And Trump knew about it.
Yes.
All of this. Trump knew about it.
Yes.
He was pressuring Pence himself. He knew what the plan was. When Trump stood there in front of that crowd and said, "We want Mike Pence to do the right thing."
Yeah.
I mean, very reminiscent of the phone call to the president of Ukraine, right? I just need you to do the right thing, or the call that he made to the
Secretary of State of Georgia.
He just needs you to do this thing. So that the thing in this case that he wanted Mike Pence to do was to not certify the state electoral votes, so that it could go back to the states and they could run out the clock and then get a bunch of attention. And once attention was cast, then people would get it. So it makes you wonder to yourself, did this coup attempt, this insurrection happening inside the Capitol with Ted Cruz and Gosart and Josh Hawley and Congresswoman Green and Boebert and all these people that all chimed in, and 100 other Republicans that were in on this thing. We just have questions about how the election went, and we're just not sure if the election should be acknowledged or not. All that business. Even Mitch McConnell, up until the 5th of January, was real hedgy on all of this stuff. Was this a plan that was destined to fail? Or, as Navarro says, what threw us off was the violent attack on the building, because then everything stopped. They went to the late night session. When they came back, there was a legal justification for not having any more of this nonsense going on. Everybody sort of came to their senses and realized that their own actions had fueled this insurrection. So it wasn't just Trump. It was the 100 Republicans going along with it and wanting to play Navarro and Bannon's game. That's what fueled the people outside. So here he's saying, Navarro's trying to say, well, the insurrection is actually what tripped us up, because their own plan just got so out of control. So it makes you wonder, was it always a dingy idea that never ever could have happened and never ever could have worked and we don't have to worry about in the future? Or was it just one violent insurrection away from working?
Yeah.
Was there a
So
possibility that
yeah,
somehow, and as you've mentioned a number of times in this podcast, if we end up in 2024 with a House of Representatives that's under Republican control instead of Democrat control as it is now, if it's under Republican control, can you rest assured that McCarthy is not going to kick in a new level of McCarthyism and allow for the electoral college votes to be sent back to states and then be overturned by state legislatures? It's, I mean, I'm sitting here saying to myself, you sound like a crazy person, but this was a plan being run by people in the White House, and
yeah.
it was in play on January 6th.
Yeah. So their plan was to create some stunt that would get media attention and would draw everyone's attention and exert pressure. What they did is, by inviting all of Trump's, Proud Boy QAnon supporters to Washington, D.C., ginning them up at that rally and then saying, hey, let's march together down to the Capitol building, they actually, lit the match that blew up their own plan. And they ended up, instead of creating a media spectacle to put pressure on the certification, to keep the certification from happening, it actually put the pressure, and the public opinion and the media attention was very much on the pressure was on to get this thing certified. And and then everybody, you remember that speech Mitch McConnell gave, and everyone was like, oh, Mitch McConnell has come to his senses and blah 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 blah, and all the stuff he's now taken back and walked back. But it totally backfired. They ended up doing the exact opposite of what they intended to do.
Yeah, good point.
Is this evil genius that we ought to be terrified of, or is this like the utter incompetence that we saw so often through the Trump administration? And I feel like so often throughout those 4 years, we went back and forth, not knowing, what are we seeing here? What are we experiencing? Is this gross incompetence beyond anything that we could fathom? Or is this so brilliant that we're being fooled? And so I'm not sure if this thing could work. If they didn't have the rally, if they didn't have the rally, if they didn't have the Stop the Steal rally, which produced thousands of people that stormed the Capitol, if that had not happened and they just did the legal, the procedural maneuverings within the certification process, could it have happened? Could it have worked then?
Yeah, that's really the question. And somehow Navarro was on the outside with the people who were running the rally. In fact, he was canceled from speaking that morning for some reason. He was glad he was canceled.
Yeah, he said in the article that he just stopped by to see the folks while he was out on his morning run exercising.
Yeah, because he was scheduled to speak there, and then they replaced him. So who knows? But Bannon and Navarro were not busy trying to organize a bunch of people to show up outside. They were busy organizing a bunch of people inside the building. Dan, we have that little clip this is a clip that might be, for some of us, the only time you ever see a clip from Steve Bannon's podcast. But this is Peter Navarro talking to Steve Bannon on Steve Bannon's podcast about what a great plan they had together, how the Green Bay sweep was going to work. And once the Green Bay sweep worked, then we were going to see the truth be told about this election that the Democrats stole by getting the American people to vote for Joe Biden. So here's that bit.
January 6th, this whole notion that the little Jamie Raskin's got, that somehow President Trump wanted to do an insurrection. You were the hero on January 6th, Steve. As I say in chapter 21 of In Trump Time, you were the guy who had the Green Bay Packers sweep strategy to go up to Capitol Hill. Pence is the quarterback. We had 100 people working on the Green Bay team as linemen, halfbacks, and fullbacks, pulling guards. who were going to make sure that we remanded the results back to the battleground states for a couple of weeks so we could get to the bottom of that.
So there it is.
So
I mean,
can I just jump in
yeah.
here, Doug? Listen, I'm a huge football fan. I'm gigantic football fan. The funniest thing that he said there was pulling guards.
Yeah.
Like if you were going to name a position on a football field, how deep would you need to go before you would get to pulling guard? We got a quarterback, and we got halfbacks, and we got linemen, and we got pulling guards. Like,
yeah.
Okay, what? Like, and those who might not know, there is a position on the offensive line called a guard, and pulling is what they do when they come out of their position, run around to the side, and block somebody else further away from where their normal position is. They pull out of their normal spot. Just bizarre that he mentions pulling guards.
Well, it does. As someone who's not a huge football fan and is concerned about the detrimental effect of football on our society, the fact that this was named after the Green Bay Packers sweep just sort of makes me feel all that better about that position that I hold about football in particular. These guys, by the fact that they name this after a Green Bay Packers sweep, and they've got this analogy that the Congress people are really these sports players that are going to run a play. And all we're doing here is running a play.
Yeah.
You weren't running a play. Congressmen and women are not football players.
This is not entertainment.
Are representing the United States of America in our constitutionally designed federal government. And you think till this very day, Peter Navarro, that what you were really doing was crafting a nifty little maneuver. It's called destroying democracy, not scoring a touchdown. That's not what was going on here. This is one of the problems, just anecdotally, about how sports so often becomes these like working metaphors for other things. But we have to remind ourselves, when you're using a metaphor, you're not actually describing the metaphor. You're trying to describe the real thing. But I think so often people get lost in it, and they then turn it into some kind of a game where you're going to get one up and score, and then what's the other team going to do? Even the way he said, all we're trying to do is send this back to the states so that they could figure out what's going on. Do you know what we don't do in this country after there's been an election for president at the federal level and states have certified the votes? You know what we don't do? Send them back to a select number of those states and say, we want you to ask someone else to cast the electoral college votes. You don't do that. So if anything, you don't use the Green Bay Packers sweep. What you use is bank robbers or armed assailants. That's what you were doing here. You weren't playing inside the rules and coming up with a clever way to have pulling guards and moving people. And all Mike Pence needs to do is run the play, as Steve Bannon kept saying all day on January 6th. Mike Pence, just run the play that we told you to run. You know why he didn't? Because it's not a play. It's the constitutional government of the United States of America, which to some people, Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon, and I dare say many other Republicans, it's a constitutional government that some people care about. And we have established rules for how this is going to go. And if you weren't happy with the way that states decided to allow for early voting or mail-in voting, then that's something you take up with the states before that election or in the next one. Yep. But once an election takes place and they were certified, that's the whole point. They were counted, sometimes sometimes recount on a recount, and then were certified. And all of the, what I continue to refer to as kooky allegations about this being a fraudulent election had been adjudicated in courts across the country
Yes. So
between
this is
November and January 6th. So
yeah.
all of that stuff, there's a procedure for it. There's a way for it to go. And for these guys to dig down deep into their, I'm some big football fan. Okay. The other thing is you're not even friggin' football players. You're not even football coaches. Like you pull Tommy Tuberville into that thing, and okay, there's a guy that knows how to talk about nothing but football, right? Because he's now a senator from Alabama and used to be a football coach. Let him talk about it. You're literally fans using the metaphor of a game to try to override the will of the American people when it comes to the election of a president of the United States.
Now you mentioned Doug that that these situations, the allegations in these different states were adjudicated in courts of law, and one of the people that Peter Navarro blames for this not working is none other than Sidney Powell, who was one of Donald Trump's lawyers. She is, as folks might remember, was the famous for the they're going to release the Kraken comment, and also filing briefs in court that were full of typos and also had all sorts of problems. So Sidney Powell really made a name for herself during all of this as Trump's legal advisor in terms of challenging the elections, but they lost it over and over and over and over and over
every
again.
time. And every time, to be
like
clear.
I think there was something like it's been almost a year now, so it's something like 60 attempts to adjudicate this in court, and it was consistently and repeatedly thrown out on the merits. And so what Peter Navarro, if they had a case, they're the courts have proven that they're willing to
Absolutely.
act. You think Bush v. Gore and all, like, the courts have gotten involved in elections, and they will.
Well, even in
if
this
there's-
one, they were willing to listen to them. They were
Yep.
willing to take briefings and expedite this stuff. Like everybody else took it seriously.
Yeah. And
Steve
what Peter
Bannon was
Navarro-
not the hero of that day.
this is the epitome of like bad sportsmanship and sore losers.
Yeah.
You lost. And frankly, you lost badly. You lost badly because you were overconfident, because you thought, like, hey, all we have to do is score this many points and we're going to win. And then, the Biden team ended up, running up the score on you. And it didn't matter that you scored those points. You got those votes that you thought you needed. You lost, and then you lost again in court, and again in court, and again and again and again and again and again in court. And then you were going to lose with this, this Green Bay sweep plan was like the epitome of being a sore loser, of trying one last ditch Hail Mary, to keep with the football metaphors, of trying to win this thing and pull this thing out and do something that could delay the inevitable. Unbelievably bad sportsmanship and poor losers, these guys.
Yeah, and look, if the accusations that they were making that this election had been fraudulent, had been stolen by interference from Venezuela or satellites or whatever it was, if you really believe that stuff, you're pulling your hair out thinking, why is no one listening to me? But the fact that someone like Peter Navarro, who's a trade advisor and an economist,
Harvard educated.
Harvard educated. By the way, Harvard's not showing itself to really put out your top notch, Democratic statespeople in recent years. Josh Hawley and Navarro being two cases in point. But if you're believing what these guys believe, that somehow this election was fraudulent and has been stolen, and then your plan was this, like, how do you keep your plan going when, as you say, Navarro is frustrated that the lawyers for the sitting president of the United States are buffoons, right? He's saying the problem was that Mike Pence's chief of staff was the problem. So why does Mike Pence have a chief of staff that's a problem? Oh, and then the problem is the lawyers that are representing Donald Trump in court on this, Sidney Powell and Giuliani and the other crowd of those people. So why aren't there decent, honorable, smart, competent lawyers taking this up if it's so clear that there's something to look into here? Because the media won't cover it? It doesn't make any sense. And if that's not, and then the next problem is the people who came to support Trump and ran their flags into the doors of the Capitol and into police officers and trampled on one another, they're the problem. If you're Peter Navarro, everybody is the problem. I mean, think about this guy. He's saying the vice president's the problem. The vice president's chief of staff is the problem. All the attorneys for the president of the United States are the problem. And then this whole thing was going to work like he's friggin', the bandit on a Scooby-Doo episode if it wasn't for those meddling kids that attacked the Capitol. So instead of him saying what happened on that day is a violation of the laws that we hold high and as valuable in this society, he's like, they ruined our plan to overrule the election from the inside by attacking the building from the outside. I mean, it's really something. And again, we're not just talking about a guy that was on the internet, right? We're not talking about Alex Jones. We're not talking about a commentator on Fox News. The man was taking an auto deposit of pay from the federal government during this work. He's a federal employee. Literally, Parks and Rec, literally doing this on government hours.
Yep.
Running an insurrection. And you know who else is doing it on government hours? Ted Cruz, Paul Gosar, Josh Hawley, the whole crowd of insurrectionists inside of our government.
Yep.
I mean, this is the thing, Rob, for you and I that come from the Christian tradition as a couple of pastors, we know that in the Christian story, you're reminded with the betrayal and the execution of Jesus that the betrayal doesn't come from outsiders. So don't be looking outside, blaming a bunch of others.
Yep.
It always comes from the inside, right? That's what you get in the betrayal narratives and the denial narratives and the I won't believe narratives, right? It's 3 out of 12 are like, I'm not with this thing. So that's where you always check. The idea that we should just be afraid that a bunch of wackadoodles showed up and were incited to attack the building from the outside, absolutely we should be raising awareness around that. But now we know that there were people, sitting congressmen and sitting senators who were working on this on behalf of Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon, listening to them and running their plays, that they're calling the shots like they're running a football game. And the players, in their mind, the players are congressmen and senators. They should be offended beyond belief. And and Navarro has chosen to write this in a book and put it out and then pitch it, and it's all over the place. And frankly, I don't know why everybody isn't just freaking out like we are at this hour of night.
Yeah. Yeah. So where do you think this goes from here, Doug? What do you think?
Well, I'm afraid it goes absolutely nowhere. I'm afraid that the January 6th committee is going to say to themselves, we just don't want to bother with that. I think they are worried about and looking into what Jim Jordan was actually doing and maybe what Gosar was actually doing. And if they actually can find out that Congress people were trying to really stall this thing out and did anything outside of typical procedural activities. Because look, to be clear, people on in both parties, senators and House representatives, have contested the certification of the Electoral College votes. That happens. It's happened in the last 2 or 3 times in the last 5 or 6 elections. It's a thing that happens. What doesn't happen is a concerted effort run by people inside the White House and outside the White House to use Congress people as their pawns to run their scheme on a mass scale. When it's been done, it's been a protest vote, a statement to be made, this kind of thing, not actually trying to return the electoral college votes back to the states so that the state legislatures can replace those electoral college votes. That, which is what they were doing, has never been done, has never even been suggested being done before, but it's precisely what went on 51 weeks ago in this country. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And, and the problem is, this is like the Kyle Rittenhouse case. The problem is our laws are not set up to deal with this.
Yeah.
The laws we have to address this kind of behavior are insufficient to this kind of behavior. If a person working in the White House is doing this kind of thing and interfering with another branch of the government that then they work in, I mean, why people aren't just squawking about all manner of this thing. That White House employees are telling Congress people how to do their job. It's just, and this little headline in Rolling Stone is great. Trump advisor worried, meaning Navarro, Trump advisor worried that he's not getting enough credit for trying to ruin American democracy. I mean, that's right out of The Onion. That's just precious. Running the Green Bay sweep. And this is the headline says former Trump advisor Peter Navarro details the quote Green Bay sweep he organized with quote from him over 100 congressmen to keep Trump in office. There were sitting members of the House and the Senate who were in on this deal.
Yep. We got our work cut out for us.
Unbelievable. And to be clear, this is why, as the joke goes, we can't have nice things. But this is why we cannot allow Republicans to run branches of the government in their current state.
Yeah, it's not safe.
It's just not safe. It is. They've been struck with some kind of a condition. It reminds me of when I had hip surgery and I was on all the things they put you on when you go under and then you come out and they put you on a bunch of pain medication. And when you're going to leave the hospital, like the next day after they made you walk the same day as your surgery, and the next day you're going to go home and take care of your own sorry self. The one rule the hospital has, you can't drive yourself. Like the thing you went through and the stuff we put in your body and your current condition, we don't let you drive yourself. Someone has to meet you here, or we have to watch you be put in a hired vehicle, like a taxi or Uber or something. But you don't just get in your own car. Republicans are like that with control of the federal government right now. Yep. What they've gone through makes them totally incapable of running the government. Does that mean that the person that's going to drive me home is the best driver in the world? No, likely not. There's no guarantee that the person that's picking me up is the best driver in the world. Happened to be the case, for me and my wife, but there's no guarantee of that. So I don't know. Maybe you think the Democrats aren't the greatest drivers in the world either, but they're not the guy that just came out of surgery, can't use his leg, and is still on some kind of painkiller. I was in a condition unworthy of driving a vehicle. That's kind of the Republican Party at the federal level. Unworthy, incapable, because they went along with this nonsense. None of them have come out and said, look, it got wacky over there. I mean, there was all kinds of stuff going on. Instead, people are out pitching this book for Navarro. They're like all for it. He's bragging about what they tried to do, and they're bragging about what they tried to do. They're going around holding town hall meetings and saying, we almost did it. I mean, it's the team, that didn't win the big game and then says, boy, we got awfully close and next year we will. So they're like, vote us back in because next time we'll get it done.
Yeah. And then it's them, flying over to Africa and bringing back the T-shirts that didn't get used, declaring themselves the champions and wearing them around.
Some people don't know this story, that whenever there's a big championship, they always print, championship T-shirts for both teams because they don't know who's going to win. Unlike our elections, the Republicans say sports games aren't rigged. And so they don't know who's going to win. So they send the shit when they always have these, like the Minnesota Vikings and the Cleveland Browns championship shirts that end up being made, and they're never worn, by anyone. They're just sent away. And you often run into these pictures of people in other parts of the world wearing around the championship shirts of teams that never actually won. Just a false narrative going on over there. And that's pretty much what we have going on in the Republican Party currently. Yep. So, well, thanks for indulging, because I just can't stop talking. I had a party here I had a little holiday party last night that I was at. And I was pigeonholing people in the kitchen, telling them about this. Like they just, and at least on Facebook and on a podcast, you can just turn it off. But man, when you're at a party and someone's got you back to the corner and they're going on about Peter Navarro.
Yeah, it's like, do you know who Peter Navarro is?
I don't even know who Peter Navarro. Well, let me tell you. Let me tell you who he is. And then you go on and on. But I think this is important to keep up in the conversation. And Tricia, we appreciate you following along tonight on all this, and all the others that have been in on it as well. As you say, Rob, we have a lot of work to do, and it's serious business. In our Vote Common Good work, we've been wondering, what's our work going to be when, if the specter of Donald Trump doesn't seem like it's looming over the American psyche, which it is. What are we going to do? And it turns out, there's a whole lot of trouble. Every one of these people should have to answer for this. And every Democrat or independent running against any of the Republicans that were in Congress at this time should ask every one of them in public, where were you on this issue? What did you do? And do you have apologies that you need to make? Because it just needs to be front and center in every single political conversation. People should go to town halls and ask this out loud.
Yep.
What were you doing on January 6th? What was your statement? Did you go along with this? Because they're going to get to the bottom of who Peter Navarro and Bannon say these 100 people are. They're going to find out who's in on it, and that's all going to become public. And it needs to be the campaign issue of 2022. Yep. Good enough, Dan. What do you got? Anything there for us, producer Dan?
Nope. All good.
We got to hit the music again.
Has it not been playing?
It's actually been playing the whole time in my headphones.
That's right.
Love it so much.
It just really takes out the droning of the conversation. All right. Well, good night, everyone. And, sleep well if you're not going to have nightmares about the fact that you live in a country that's maybe choosing to run its government in ways that you never thought was possible.
The fragility of democracy.
Thank you, Peter Navarro, Steve Bannon. I mean, twice indicted Steve Bannon, too. I mean, this guy just... Yeah. We should do a whole thing on Steve Bannon sometime. He is just he's a real dreamboat. That guy. He stole money from the people that gave him money for that private wall that Dan and I looked at in El Paso. The little half wall they built up that hill. The reason they didn't finish that ding-a-lingy little wall up in that private property, it's because he stole their money.
Couldn't have seen that.
And then was indicted for it, and then was pardoned for it. I mean,
you can't make this stuff up. Yeah.
They're just lawless. The whole crowd are just lawless. It's bonkers. And honestly, people used to do all this stuff and cover it up. Like this and what went on at the Willard Hotel. This is like when Watergate happened and there was a break-in at the Watergate Hotel. They were like trying to spend $1 million in 1972 to cover it up. What's going on at the Willard Hotel where Bannon was and what's going on with Navarro. These guys are out selling books about here's what I did.
They're podcasting about it. Yeah.
They're podcasting about it and selling the plan. It's just unbelievable. You would think they would have said they attacked the Capitol. We need to like burn down every bit of evidence about what we were doing. Instead, they're like, I think it would have worked had they not tried to attack the Capitol. As if what you did was not criminal. I mean, it was so bad. Mike Pence didn't go along with it. Think about that.
That says
for
a lot,
minute.
really.
So bad. Mike Pence didn't go along with it.
Trump's lapdog was a bridge too far for even him.
And look, this and
one more
Republicans, thing. Yeah, one more thing. Yeah, at the end of the bar while you're walking out, yelling at you. One more thing. It's bad for our country to have the second major political party be untrustworthy to drive themselves home.
Yep.
That's a bad thing. Like, I don't want Republicans to be elected to anything anymore because I'm just bitter. And I voted for Republicans most of my adult life. So, but there's just nothing there anymore. And that's a real problem for the democracy that we're trying to hold together. We have a multi-party system, but only 2 of the parties are big enough to be warranted as legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
So the Green Party and the Libertarian Party and the Cannabis Party and the there's probably some other party in there. The Green Party, I say them right. All these parties, they exist and you can vote for, but they're not going to organize caucuses and stuff. Like the only way we're going to have Republicans and Democrats for the foreseeable future. And when one half of that is unworkable, I don't know what you do. Well, you vote for Democrats until, I don't know, this anesthesia wears off. And we all thought maybe they're going to pop awake after the Trump thing. And once he lost, and then they're like, no, let's just say he didn't lose. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Just to recap, Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon think he didn't lose. Think about that.
Just to recap.
All right, is that enough?
I think that's enough for the whole year.
I think 2021 is now in the books. In the books. Well, all right. Have fun tomorrow, you two.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.